"This mission is a suicide run, and we all know it," whispered the staff sergeant as Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Cross studied the intelligence briefing. When her commanding officer announced that their unit would attempt an impossible rescue behind enemy lines with zero backup, everyone assumed they were looking at their final assignment. Nobody knew that Rebecca was about to make the single decision that would turn a hopeless situation into the most successful operation in her division's history. Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Cross sat in the briefing room at Camp Phoenix in Kabul. Her 34 years of experience evident in the way she absorbed every detail without taking notes. Around her, younger officers frantically scribbled information about their next assignment, but Rebecca had learned to trust her memory over paperwork during 2 previous deployments. The other commanders respected her tactical knowledge, though few understood where her unconventional strategies originated. They saw a competent officer who had earned her rank through solid performance and steady leadership. What they didn't see was the daughter of a career Navy SEAL, who had been teaching her advanced tactical thinking since she could walk. Rebecca's path to the Army had been indirect. She'd spent her early 20s working as a corporate consultant, applying the strategic thinking her father had taught her to business problems. When the September 11th attacks changed everything, she'd enlisted with a clear purpose: to use her unique analytical abilities in service of something larger than quarterly profits. If you want to hear more stories about veterans who found extraordinary strength in ordinary moments, make sure to subscribe. These are the stories that prove heroism isn't always loud or obvious. Rebecca grew up in a military family where tactical thinking was as natural as breathing. Her father, Master Chief Petty Officer James Cross, had served with SEAL Team 6 before retiring to raise his daughter after her mother's death from cancer. Instead of bedtime stories, Rebecca heard detailed breakdowns of successful operations and mission planning principles. James Cross had taught his daughter that every impossible situation contained hidden opportunities that most people couldn't see. He'd walk her through hypothetical scenarios during their weekend camping trips, challenging her to find solutions when conventional approaches failed. By age 16, Rebecca could analyze complex problems from multiple angles and identify leverage points that others missed completely. When Rebecca joined the Army, she brought an analytical framework that her father had spent decades perfecting. She understood that successful operations required more than following established procedures. Sometimes they demanded the courage to abandon conventional wisdom and trust insights that couldn't be found in any manual. Her father's influence shaped more than her tactical thinking. James Cross had built his reputation by making decisions that other people called impossible, then proving them wrong through careful preparation and flawless execution. Rebecca carried that same willingness to take calculated risks when lives were on the line. The crisis began when intelligence reported that a reconnaissance team had been captured deep in Taliban-controlled territory. Sergeant Martinez and his 4-man unit had been missing for 72 hours, and conventional rescue attempts had failed due to the remote location and heavy enemy presence in the area. Colonel Peterson called an emergency planning session with his senior staff. The captured soldiers were being held in a mountain compound 40 kilometers from the nearest friendly forces, surrounded by terrain that made vehicle approach impossible. Standard protocol called for waiting until air support could soften enemy positions, but intelligence indicated the prisoners would be moved within 24 hours, when Rebecca suggested a small unit infiltration using unconventional routes. Colonel Peterson expressed serious doubts about the feasibility. The proposed operation would require her team to move across hostile territory with minimal support, relying entirely on stealth and precise timing. Other staff officers agreed that the risks were too high for the potential reward. Peterson's concerns were legitimate from a conventional military perspective. Rebecca's plan violated several established principles about force protection and mission support. Her approach depended on variables that couldn't be controlled or predicted using standard planning methods. The colonel worried that attempting the rescue might result in losing additional soldiers without saving the original captives. Rebecca spent the evening studying topographical maps and satellite imagery, but her real analysis happened in quiet moments when she closed her eyes and visualized the terrain. Her father had taught her to think like the landscape itself, understanding how weather, season, and human activity created opportunities that existed for only brief windows of time. The weight of 5 soldiers' lives pressed against her consciousness. She thought about Sergeant Martinez's wife and 2 young children, about the other team members who had families waiting for their return. These weren't abstract tactical problems anymore. They were human beings whose survival depended on someone making the right decision under impossible circumstances. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. James Cross had faced similar moments during his SEAL career, times when conventional wisdom said to wait while his instincts said to move. Rebecca realized she was facing the same choice that had defined her father's legacy. The proposed rescue mission felt right in ways that had nothing to do with military doctrine and everything to do with the intuitive understanding her father had spent years developing. Sometimes the impossible becomes possible when someone refuses to accept that word against direct orders. Rebecca assembled a volunteer team of 6 soldiers who were willing to attempt the unconventional rescue. Each team member brought specialized skills: Staff Sergeant Kim for demolitions, Corporal Washington for communications, and Private Thompson for medical support. They spent 12 hours studying alternate routes and rehearsing contingency procedures. Rebecca's plan relied on moving during a brief weather window when low cloud cover would mask their approach. Instead of following established paths, they would use seasonal stream beds and animal trails that provided natural concealment. The strategy demanded perfect timing and coordination, with no room for equipment failure or navigation errors as they prepared to depart. Colonel Peterson made one final attempt to stop the mission. He reminded Rebecca that unauthorized operations could result in court-martial proceedings even if they succeeded. The political implications of losing additional soldiers would be catastrophic for everyone involved, including Rebecca's military career. Despite Peterson's warnings, Rebecca knew that waiting for official approval meant accepting the capture team's likely execution. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces were already preparing to move the prisoners to a more secure location deeper in hostile territory. Every hour of delay reduced the chances of a successful rescue and increased the likelihood that Sergeant Martinez and his team would disappear permanently. The moment of departure arrived with characteristic military precision. But Rebecca felt the familiar calm that had guided her through childhood challenges in the New Mexico wilderness. Rebecca's team moved through the mountain terrain like ghosts, using her father's teachings to navigate paths that didn't exist on official maps. They reached the enemy compound just as the first prisoner transport vehicles were being prepared for departure. The timing was so precise that it seemed impossible, but Rebecca had calculated every variable based on patterns her father had taught her to recognize. Instead of a direct assault, Rebecca's team created a diversion that drew the majority of Taliban forces away from the compound. Using demolitions and coordinated movements, they made a small unit appear like a much larger force attacking from multiple directions. The deception worked perfectly because it exploited the enemy's own tactical assumptions. While Taliban commanders repositioned their forces to counter the apparent large-scale attack, Rebecca and 2 team members infiltrated the compound through a drainage system that satellite imagery had missed completely. They located the captured Americans and began extraction procedures that relied on precise timing and absolute silence. The operation succeeded because Rebecca had understood something that conventional planning couldn't account for: human behavior. under stress follows predictable patterns that can be exploited by someone patient enough to study them. Her father's SEAL training had emphasized this principle, and Rebecca applied it with devastating effectiveness. Within 6 hours, all 5 captured soldiers were safely back at Camp Phoenix, along with intelligence documents that revealed the location of 3 additional Taliban strongholds. Colonel Peterson found Rebecca in the medical tent, checking on the rescued soldiers who were receiving treatment for minor injuries and dehydration. His expression carried a mixture of relief and amazement as he admitted that her unauthorized mission had achieved results that conventional operations couldn't have matched. The success of Rebecca's rescue operation led to immediate changes in divisional strategy. Senior commanders began incorporating unconventional tactics and local terrain knowledge into their standard planning procedures. Rebecca was promoted to major and assigned to develop new training protocols that emphasized adaptive thinking over rigid doctrine. More significantly, the rescued intelligence provided information that prevented 3 major attacks on coalition forces. Sergeant Martinez personally thanked Rebecca, telling her that her decision to trust her instincts had saved not just his team, but countless other soldiers who would have been targeted in the planned attacks. Rebecca's father called her 2 weeks later, having heard about the operation through military channels. James Cross told his daughter that she'd honored their family's tradition of making hard decisions when others hesitated. The legacy he'd built through decades of SEAL operations would continue through Rebecca's willingness to trust her training when conventional wisdom demanded surrender. Major Rebecca Cross spent her remaining deployment training other officers in the analytical techniques her father had taught her. She often reminded them that true leadership means recognizing when established procedures aren't enough, and having the courage to trust insights that can't be measured or quantified. In the mountains of Afghanistan, that principle had turned one woman's decision into a legend that would inspire military tacticians for generations to come.